BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, warnings that the new border inspection system risks letting in disease. Let's start though with dairy farming, which is at a tipping point and many may leave. Well, that's the warning from the Royal Association of British Dairy Farmers. Its chair, Robert Craig, says farmers will need confidence to invest for the future, and at the moment many don't have it. All this week we're going to look at dairy farming, from the pressures on smaller farms to indoor cows and TB. Well, industry figures show that the number of dairy farms has been falling for some time. The Farming Levy Board, the AHDB survey in April this year, showed a 5% fall since April 2023, with 440 farmers quitting. The amount of milk produced per farm, though, is up as remaining farms get bigger to stay economically viable. Mr. Craig, who runs 3 dairy farms in the north of England, told me there are several challenges facing the industry.
We've got a fairly major acute skilled shortage in the dairy industry, very competitive now to recruit people of the right skills that we need. Economics are obviously fairly tricky, cost of production, a lot of which we don't have a lot of control over. We're very much influenced. The price we take is influenced by sort of global events and commodity events, as is sort of energy and feed costs. And lastly, I suppose the cost of compliance as we move forward, increasingly through either legislation or our milk buyers. We've got an added burden of compliance in reducing emissions and complying with all manner of planning consents, such as biodiversity net gain or slurry storage or reducing emissions. So I think there are 3 main challenges as we go forward as an industry.
You talk there about the cost of compliance, the drive to net zero, things like planning. DEFRA has fairly recently announced a review of muck spreading in the autumn in England. That followed a legal challenge about the farming for water rules. Given the issues around water pollution, that does make sense, doesn't it?
A lot of the rules around spreading manure in the autumn is to do with the crop need and very much farming by the calendar, and it isn't really that suitable very often, where obviously the weather doesn't necessarily play by the rules all the time. So we'll see what the outcome of that is, but whether it's positive or negative, who knows at this point.
Does this link in with one of the other things you mentioned there, the tricky economics of dairy farming? Because fundamentally, farms have got bigger, there are more cattle, and you need better and perhaps more slurry storage, but that's very expensive.
And I think this is where the uncertainty and the lack of confidence potentially comes looking forward into the future. I mean, there are a lot of farmers now towards the end of their career. They've possibly got by until this stage with the facilities they've got. All of these investments are long-term investments, and you need a degree of confidence to actually make those investments to progress into the future. And so I'm really concerned about the lack of confidence, I think, across the dairy industry. If we're serious about producing food and dairy products domestically, that probably begins with economics and a long-term vision for domestic food production.
Does that mean really that the cost of your products, milk, cheese and so on, will have to go up to reflect the difficulties that you've talked about?
Well, I think it will. We've got to recognise how we've got to where we are, and it's very much marginal economics that have driven the scale and the restructuring of the dairy industry. In my own mind, I think we're approaching a bit of a tipping point where the critical mass of the industry is in real threat. If we've got to invest for the long term, we've got to have confidence. We've got to know that government's on our side, and we've got to have the support to move forward. And without that, I'm afraid you're going to see more and more people leave the industry.
Robert Craig, more on dairy farming all week. Fruit and veg importers say a shortage of government inspectors at ports is reducing the shelf life of products, and the current system risks spreading plant disease. At the end of April, the government introduced its new border target operating model, a post-Brexit system of biosecurity checks for goods entering the UK. It means products classed as high or medium risk have to be physically checked, including live animals and meat, as well as fruit and vegetables and some plant products. Well, the government built a checking facility at Sevington in Kent and said it'd take a pragmatic approach to implementing the checks to avoid queues. Other companies have also built private inspection points where they too use government inspectors. The British Association of Tomato Growers say they're seeing significant delays in seeds and plants getting to farms, and the logistics company PML Seafrigo told Farming Today they regularly see consignments of fruit which should be inspected inspected, waiting too long for government inspectors to arrive, only to be green-lit without a check. Our reporter Theo White met Mike Parr, their head of region for UK and Ireland, at the base in Dover.
So what are you doing now, Mike?
Typical example, Peruvian blueberries. There's no DEFRA tape on them, so they've not been examined. They're all customs cleared, but nobody's examined them.
And when did they come in?
Oh, these have been here for a day or two, but they've already been cleared. So nobody's inspected the blueberries. Because of the lack of staff, they've just turned them green. So nobody's inspected them.
And so they'll go out uninspected?
They go out as they are.
In an ideal world, have these waited a day longer than they needed to be here? Because they should have come in, been checked and gone out. But at the moment, they've come in, not been checked, and after a day just been greened anyway.
Yes, it's delaying the fruit. It's a living product, isn't it? So it's less time it can spend on the shelf. But in this instance, nobody's looked at them because they didn't want to or they don't have the staff. So anything could be in there. It's getting to the stage where hauliers do not want to come to the UK if they have to wait 12 hours for their vehicles to clear. Because, as we say, if those wheels aren't turning, they're not earning.
Provender Nurseries in Kent imports around £3 million worth of plants every year, and a lot of this is high and medium risk and so subject to checks. To avoid goods being diverted to government facilities, they converted a warehouse at their site in Swanley so inspections could take place with the plants under their own care. While they've had no problems with getting inspectors to come, they do worry that government control posts such as Sevington are not up to the job. Stuart Tickner is the head of nursery production and biosecurity at Provender.
Very lucky we've got a very good AFRA inspector. He's here when the lorry arrives. They wait for it to be unloaded and they inspect it straight away. We've had no waiting times at all. We have had a couple of loads green lighted, but they have been the low risk loads. But all the high risk stock has been inspected.
Have you had any problems since this operation began?
Yeah, on a load come in. The pest was Picatia. We found it on the plants. We closed the control point. We isolated the infected stock. We destroyed it by fire. And then we cleaned the entire control point down and got it signed off by AFRA to start using again. Because we have the ability to offload the entire lorry, space it out, inspect every single plant, so we was able to, luckily for us, we were able to inspect the plants and save some of them.
Would that be the same at a government control post?
They won't be because they don't have the space, the facility to offload the entire lorry, inspect them individually.
Richard McKenna, Provender Nurseries, Managing Director. I do feel for the industry as a whole that there needs to be some back to the drawing board thinking.
Like what?
I'm not quite sure the buildings are fit for purpose. I think the buildings were built without engagement with the industry who actually know how to offload and reload vehicles. It sounds very simple, but the product we ship, the product we handle, it's incredibly variable. It can be one plant can be a truckload, or you can get 100,000 plants in a truckload. The facilities that are built around the ports, I don't think are fit for purpose.
Theo White reporting there from Kent. DEFRA told us they're not seeing routine delays at the border and that Sevington operates a 24/7 service to cope with the just-in-time nature of supply chains. They go on to say that they are confident that capacity, including staff, is sufficient for the current volume of checks. But as I mentioned, tomato growers too are worried about the way the system is working. They are concerned about a plant virus and say that to reduce the risk, plants are grown and then transported in batches, kept separate from other tomato plants. But once they're inspected, that biosecurity is broken. Simon Conway is chair of the British Tomato Growers Association.
There's a disease called tomato brown rugose virus, which is decimating tomato crops worldwide. It is so easily transmitted. You cannot guarantee the biosecurity once that plant's looked at.
Have you had actual instances then already where that disease or any other disease has been passed on?
We haven't yet, but this is the first year this situation is arising, because before the plants would come straight through with their phytosanitary certificates and would go straight to the nurseries, which is complete. The biosecurity is not broken, so this risk wasn't there last year.
We did ask DEFRA about this, and they say the effectiveness of the import controls has been demonstrated through September and October by the interception at Sevington of 34 consignments of plants infested with a fruit tree pest native to China and present in mainland Europe. But they say those consignments were destroyed and a damaging outbreak for UK fruit growers was prevented. So they think they've got this covered.
We don't disagree that biosecurity needs to be checked. What we're saying is, because of the nature of these edible crops and the virus transition, the inspections should be done at our growers' sites. So we're asking for a derogation, really, to say that these edible crops, where we've got this specific virus risk, bear in mind, we're talking 200 hectares. This is 20% of all the tomatoes that the UK population eats are coming through the borders in these next 8 weeks. Is actually critical. And if a significant part of that crop got this virus, there'll be a severe tomato shortage next year. And this includes peppers as well, because pepper plants are included in this virus risk.
We heard in Theo's report just now a lot of frustration with the way the system's working, or some will say not working. Do your members share that?
Yes, they do. I think at the moment there's a dual issue. The plants are one thing, but what we're seeing probably more so is the seed imports. And the seed imports for growing tomatoes is in a terrible situation where we're getting delays. So it's taking up to the average of the moment about 36 days to turn that seed round from test to getting back to the propagator where they need to be grown. That delay, again, is huge cost to the tomato industry. And so half our tomato growers are seeing this delay, and it's already causing financial pain. We've not only got young plants, but we've got the delays in seed, which is causing huge issues.
Simon Conway there from the British Tomato Growers Association. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.